Hello, and welcome back to Track Talk Live. I'm Miss Choo Choo, and we're here with Mr. Clickety here.
Mr. Clickety.
And we're welcoming you back for another great episode of our live show. I just want to remind you to ask questions at any time in the chat right below here so that we can answer them live in time. But first, let's talk about what you've been up to since our last live show. What's new in your world, Doug?
Well, Lily, it's great to see you again. And, well, yes, I'm in S-scale, as I've mentioned, and I got a locomotive that hasn't been in production for about 5 years. I got it through eBay, which is kind of what you have to do in S-scale because there's so little available. But I've got work to do on it. It came as a DC locomotive, and I have to, well, I actually have added a DCC decoder to it, so it'll run on DCC. And then I have plans for extra detailing and then weathering. So, and normally what I do when I do this stuff, I have to make a little chart, you know, because I forget what I'm up to. So I make a chart for that locomotive and all the things I want to do to it, you know. So decoder, then there's headlights and so on. Make sure it's oiled and greased if it's been sitting around a long time, all that kind of thing. So anyway, that's been my project, or one of my projects since we've
keeping everything
since I've seen you.
Fresh and new. Have you been doing anything Christmas train related?
Well,
or seasonal holiday?
To be honest, not really. When our son was young, we used to put up an American Flyer train that I still have
around the tree. Yep.
Yeah, but we haven't done that for years. Maybe we should do that.
Maybe
actually.
It's time to get the train back out. Feel seasonal, festive.
Well, it's fun. I mean, people my age think of model trains and Christmas because a boy my age, kid, I mean, model train was the best thing.
Yeah.
Best Christmas present.
Best present.
Yeah.
Hours of entertainment.
Yeah.
All right, so like I said before, keep asking your questions live in the comments below and we'll try to answer them. Also, if you look below the video player, you'll see a sign up for our newsletter banner. So sign up to be notified when we're doing Track Talk Live again, get some great tips and tricks in your email, and be notified of what Model Railroad Academy is up to. But without further ado, we'll get into some of the questions.
All right.
So our first question here says, help please Doug, and then in parentheses, Miss Choo Choo, which I've now officially adopted as my Model Railroad Academy name. So Miss Choo Choo here in the building.
Very good.
With all of the different pins out in DCC, where does one start? I've seen from 8 to 21 pins so far, and I'm baffled, befuddled, bewildered, and bemused.
Yeah,
So
all of those at one time,
yeah.
Well, the 21 pin connector is a connector that's used between the decoder and the cable that connects to it. And normally you don't even mess with that. I mean, that's basically a factory thing. You plug it in. The other end of that cable, your typical decoder plug that plugs into a locomotive, if your locomotive is DCC ready, it'll have a plug there with a dummy jumper plug in it already so that it'll run on DC. Then you convert it to DCC. All you do is take the dummy plug out and plug in this new one, which is an 8-pin. And you know, the 8 pins are pretty much straightforward. There's track power, 2 wires for track power, 2 wires for motor power, and then there's a common and a ground and lighting connections, and then usually a couple of wires for other things you might want to do to automate off of the DCC. So it's pretty straightforward, and there are we could actually show, maybe even in the next show, we could bring a diagram that shows the color code, because all the color codes are standard within the whole realm of DCC, all the manufacturers.
Yeah, it's easy to see it out on a visual.
So when you see the color code, it makes a lot of sense.
All right. I don't know if I mentioned if that question was from Scott in Gopher Ridge, Florida, who is an HO. So I'll say that from now on in front of every question.
Yeah.
Our next one is from Rick in Anthem, Arizona, also an HO. And he's asking, what's the easiest way to wire track signals to function with Atlas code 83 track to show turnout positions? Very specific.
Well, there are more than one answer to that question. Generally speaking, if you have a way to operate your switch, say you're using let's just say a Circuitron Tortoise, which is real common. A Circuitron Tortoise has auxiliary connectors on it, so when you throw the switch, it not only has contacts to throw the polarity of the frog if you have an Electro frog switch, but also extra contacts that you can use to operate a signal to show you the switch position, and that's the the easy way to do it. And in the old days with DC, you could actually have a LED work off the polarity of the frog, but it's different now with DCC because the frog doesn't work the same way. So best thing is to have some kind of a controller for your switch. As Caboose Hobbies makes a ground throw switch. If you want to throw your switch manually, you can buy a ground throw switch that still has auxiliary contacts built into it for signaling.
So a few options there.
Yeah, yeah.
Variety. Our next question is from Carl in Arkansas, also HO, a lot of HO already. Carl says that he is 6'3" and is wondering what you think is an ideal viewing height for a model railroad that he's building.
Well, normally the rule of thumb is chest high for the best viewing angle. You know, if you get it too low, it's like you're in an airplane looking down at it. And so you want to get more like a natural viewing angle, which is about chest high. But of course, if you have a big layout or a layout that's deep, and you need to reach over it, that can be a problem. So sometimes people lower their layout just so they have better access. And you know, 48, 52, maybe even 54 is pretty standard for most layouts.
Yeah. Ideally, you could get like a mechanical table and lower it down to work on, and then higher it up to view.
There you go. And
I don't know where you would find one.
And there is a ladder kind of a gizmo you can buy. That's kind of like a diving board thing that on wheels, and then it hangs over the top. It's for working on cars actually. But so you can lay in this thing and work on your layout. But it's kind of weird because you have to lay in your belly, like on a diving board, and work.
Not super comfortable.
It's a little strange, kind of a strange position.
Got to get used to that.
Yeah.
All right, our next question is from Jim in Ohio, also an HO. Do modelers typically spray with dull coat on their models that have been weathered and with weathering powders? Does a clear coat change the look of the weathering, and is it necessary?
Well, it depends on your weathering chalks. The higher quality weathering chalks have a fixative built right into them, and it actually works off of heat. If you scrub, say you're putting your weathering chalks on with a little brush, sometimes people use a toothbrush or a small stiff bristle brush. If you rub them in there, the friction generates enough heat to actually settle them onto the car.
Oh.
So you shouldn't have to worry too much about the chalk where the
powder
coming off when you handle it. But well, another rule of thumb is I don't handle my cars all that much once I weather them either. I try not to handle them too much, but you can certainly put a fixative over the chalk. People do that. It may change the color a little bit there again, depending on the type of chalk. A little experimentation would be in order, just to see, try it both ways and see what you think.
Test it out before you put it on.
Yeah,
there.
try it on something. You know, people go to a flea market and buy just a car for $1 or something. You know, and practice on it. You can practice on it with not only chalk weathering, but with paint weathering or India ink weathering and any of these other things too. Just use it as an experimental surface.
Yeah, practice on it. Practice makes perfect. Our next question is live from Jim, also modeling in HO. I have an HO around the room layout. I'm starting to wire it for DCC. I'm going to use Wago connectors instead of Suitcase connectors. Have you ever used this type of connector?
You know, I'm not familiar with that connector. I'm sorry.
Wago or Wago.
If it's like a kind of like a Suitcase connector, I know people sometimes have trouble with Suitcase connector. If you don't have the right kind of tool, sometimes the connector doesn't actually crimp square on like it should. You know, you don't make a good connection, and so I understand that. I mean, some people just strip the bus wire and solder right onto it. I've seen other people use wire nuts. So whatever works good for you, I'd say use. But I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that connector.
All right. Our next question is another live question from Roger. Any tips in using static grass application in general? And have you had any problems mixing various types of grass in the same time, color, or size?
No, I really haven't had any trouble mixing the different kinds of grasses. I found that the actual static grass, the machine is you need to use a heavy duty one. The early battery powered models just didn't have enough power to really make that static grass stand up. So I'd get I like the plug-in ones, the plug-in to 110, then use the battery. To run them, but or a battery eliminator, like a Walt transformer to run them. But that's what I'd recommend. So get a high power static grass machine.
High power.
Yeah, and really it should work well.
Oh, good answer. All right, our next question is from Steve in Red Bluff, California, working in G-scale. I'm a newbie here. I'm planning on running a ceiling train with approximately 120 feet of track. Will my USA Trains Power 10 be able to handle that much track? And do you have any suggestions for me on my layout?
Well, yeah, you have a 10 amp power supply, which is more than enough to run USA Trains. And the only thing I would suggest is that over time, you know, your rail connectors can get corroded or dirty, and so I would put feeders in every, you know, if you did them every 10, 12 feet even, that would be great to make sure you have even power all the way around the loop. You don't want your train to slow down on the far side, so you want to keep even power all the way around. So spread some feeders out and you should be fine.
Prevent it from slowing and stopping.
Yep, and then you can run your bus wire. If it's on a shelf, you can run your bus wire right along the back side of the shelf, lay it right there, and then connect your feeders right to it as you go.
Easy peasy. All right, our next question is from John. Which DC system do you recommend? I've worked on layouts with Digitrax and NCE. I see differences, but wondered about what issues you've heard from other modelers.
Well, there's a lot of controversy on that. Everybody seems to have their favorite, but personally, I have NCE. And when when all that stuff first came out, we had a discussion among kind of our local group, and we decided that we thought that NCE was easier to use. I mean, they're all interchangeable. It's just how the controls work and all that. So, you know, I don't want to get all kinds of cards and letters saying that I dissed Digitrax, but personally, I like NCE. I think it's real easy to use. That's just my personal
Not
opinion.
trying to cause any controversy.
Personal opinion.
Yep, there you go.
Yeah.
All right, our next question is from Michael, working in HO scale in Colorado. What can I use to freshen up my trees? They are drying up.
Well, you know, the kind of the floral trick is to use glycerin.
Oh.
You know, the glycerin will, if you just take if you're making your trees out of something real, like some kind of real foliage, you can, or lichen, you can actually dip it in glycerin, and that will absorb into the whatever you're using and preserve it. But also you can use, you know, what I do is if my trees are starting to look kind of, you know, sometimes the foliage kind of gets dusty or dirty or the color starts going away, I'll just take some spray glue and spray the tree and then add a little more, say, ground foam or whatever your particular foliage is in the tree, just add another layer onto the tree and kind of brightens it up.
Freshen it up?
Yeah, freshens it up.
Would you recommend for trees drying out, like doing any kind of temperature control or humidity control in the room? Could that be causing it too?
Well, yeah, I mean, if your train room gets real dry, depending on where is this?
Colorado.
Yeah, if your train room gets real dry, it could be your scenery is drying out. I mean, the best thing, no matter where you live, is to keep a constant temperature and humidity in your train room. So, you know, if it's too dry, you can add a humidifier. If it's too damp, you can add a dehumidifier and so on. But yeah, to keep even temperature and humidity is great. I mean, for expansion and contraction, as far as the track goes and everything, it's a good idea to keep it clean. And then some people actually buy a portable air filter. So you can actually buy a freestanding air filter, and then it'll circulate the air and keep the dust down.
Yeah, I know that's a huge problem in Colorado, the dry air.
Yeah.
All right, next question is from Dallas in Brisbane, Australia.
Aha!
So, Australia, working
All right.
in HO. I'm just changing from DC to digital. Is it possible to mix products from different manufacturers? I have a basic Roco multi-mouse system, and I'm wondering if you know if the data stream is compatible with any other Digi systems.
Well, all the DCC that's sold in the U.S. Now I can't say it's true for Australia, but all the DCC that's sold in the U.S. is designed to be NMRA compatible, National Model Railroad Association compatible, and so all the manufacturers will intermix. Which is really good. So you don't have to stay with just one brand. I mean,
widens your options then.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I don't know exactly what's going on in Australia, but Roco is is known worldwide, and I would assume that Roco is following the NMRA standards.
Yeah, well-known brand. They probably should be.
So.
All right, good answer. Our next question is from Terry. I have a G-scale Aristocraft locomotive and have been looking for some powered trucks for an SD45. Any idea where they could be located?
Ooh, boy, Aristo, that's too bad. Aristo made some really good stuff, but they're out of business.
Yeah.
And I work with a guy here in town that does a lot of G-scale work, and he's always looking for Aristo parts. And about the only way you can find them now is from estates or on eBay, something like that. Yeah.
Gotta be on the hunt a lot then.
Yeah, it's kind of like being an S scale. You have to, it's hard to find the new stuff, and so you have to search around these places for used or estate models. So that's the best I can offer you is just keep a watch for that stuff online.
Keep on trucking, keep on researching. Our next question is from Jim Moe in Pittsford, New York, working in HO. I've bought several hopper cars at a show with plugs holding the trucks to the body instead of screws. The plugs fall out. How can I replace them with screws?
Well, I've done that two different ways. Actually, if you go into the model airplane department over at your local hobby shop, you can find what's called a T-nut, a small T-nut. And normally the truck screws in HO are 256 thread. So if you get a 256 T-nut.
A T-nut.
It has a sleeve, it's like a nut with a sleeve on it.
Okay.
And it generally, for model airplane use, it's a T-nut that it has little teeth in it where you can push it into some wood and it'll bite into it. Well, I flatten the teeth out because you don't want the teeth.
Oh, okay.
So flatten the teeth out and then you can glue it into that hole. And then you have a ready-made 256 hole in there that will accept your 256 truck screw. Now, when you screw the trucks on, it may be that you need to use a washer. The actual hole, the mounting hole in the truck could be bigger than a number 2 screw, so you'd have to use a washer. A second way is to actually, and I've done it this way too, is to actually fill that hole with body putty, like you'd use in a model automobiles.
Yep.
Just fill that hole with body putty, and then you can re-drill it and tap it for a number 2 screw.
So that'd be the right size.
That'd be the second way.
All right. Our next question is from Chaz in Illinois, working in N-scale. Please explain and or provide a sketch of what a bus wire is. Does it originate from the power pack and then loop around the layout back to the power pack, or just terminate someplace? Thank you.
Well, yes. It can do both, but you've got the right idea.
Yeah.
It originates from your power supply, and a bus wire could be true. You could use it for either DC or DCC as far as that goes. But depending on your layout, it could be a dead end where the power supply would tie in. The best place would be in the center, so you have equalized voltages going out both directions to the dead ends.
Yeah.
Or if you have the type of layout that's an around the wall layout or someplace where you could make it a continuous circle, well, that's fine too, because that'll equalize the voltage. It'll keep the voltage equal all the way up. There's no dead end. So either way works great. Just depending on the shape of your layout, really.
Yeah, a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Let's come back to that. It really depends on your layout quite a bit. All right, we got another live question from Carl in Iowa. Do you have any tips or products you have used that are great for cleaning your tracks?
Well, there's a lot of controversy on that too. I use a track cleaning block made out of a foam sanding block.
Okay.
And I cut it down. I have a scale. I cut it down to the right size so it kind of fits the track. And then I put it onto a little stick so I can get down there without breaking some of my scenery. I can get down there and actually scrub it with the sanding block. And then I've heard some people say, well, the sanding block is too coarse. Well, I use a fine grit sanding block. It's not like I'm wearing the rail down.
You're not scrubbing it hard.
No, and I like using that. I mean, with my layout, it doesn't really get greasy. I mean, what's on the track is usually some kind of dry kind of dirt.
Yeah.
But now when I'm in the commercial trains that I work on, I actually use they do get kind of a film in their track, and I use lacquer thinner, which is stinky.
Yeah.
But you don't want to breathe too much of it, but it works, and so you can put a little bit of it on a pad. That's what I do. I have a pad track cleaning car. I put a little bit of it on a pad, and then run the car around and clean it that way. So you just don't want to overdo it with lacquer thinner, but a little bit of it goes a long way.
Open a lot of windows when you do
that. Yeah.
Be safe. All right. Oh, we just got another live question come in. Keep asking your questions live so we can answer them during the show in the comment section below. All right. David from New Jersey, working in HO, asks, is there any reason why I shouldn't use real sand for ballasting an HO track? Or ballasting?
No reason at all. In fact, I think we talked on maybe an earlier Track Talk Live about the fact that when I travel, I like to bring back sand from different parts of the country. Sand and earth, both. But the story was they'll get these Gatorade bottles that have the big, with a wide mouth on them. Drink the Gatorade while you're traveling. Save the bottle, and then if you see some earth or sand that you like, fill up the bottle, and you're going to bring it home, of course, and sift it.
Yep.
But they have a nice selection of multicolor sand and earth the same way. And there's no reason why you can't use it for scenery. When you do your gluing, if you're using any type of like a liquid glue, you want to make sure you have a little bit of just a tiny bit of liquid soap in it to break down the surface tension, so that it doesn't beat up when you put the glue in.
Doesn't make any pockets and stuff. All right, we got another question live from Bruce. I run an HO scale model and have about 50 feet of track looped around my table. I have 5 or so feeder lines supplying power to the track in various spots. My trouble is this. In one 3-foot section, the train slows down. I even have a feeder wire right in that section. Is there any way to determine if there is too much resistance in the track, or better yet, what is possibly going on?
Well, there could be one small section that's acting up. I think what I would do is I would actually get some test leads, and clip them onto a good part of the track, and then try touching the test leads to the area where it's slowing down. And I actually do it one rail at a time. So if it speeds up, you'll know which rail is acting up, because you could have one good rail and one bad rail.
Right next to each other.
So that's the best thing. You could have, it doesn't matter, have 5-6 feet of wire with test clip leads, and just try it out that way and see. It's more than likely a bad connection just in one spot on one rail, I would say.
Takes a lot of testing.
Just experience. Well, it's not that much work. You just test leads and from a good part of the section of the track over to the section that's acting up, and just have a locomotive on there and touch it to the rail and see if the locomotive picks up speed.
All right, our next question is from Jeff in Mountain Lake Terrace, Washington. I have a room full of N-scale stuff that I've acquired over 35 years. I'm at the point where I need to use it or get rid of it. I have the time and everything I need to build a small layout 10 by 10 room. My issue is DC versus DCC. I could be up and running in a week with DC, wait another year or two to have the funds to acquire what I need to build DCC, or start with a DC setup and then convert to DCC. So if he converts, what specific do's and don'ts can I do to make the conversion smoother when the time comes?
Well, there's really nothing much you have to do to switch over, because you're going to have track feeds anyway, and you're going to have a bus wire anyway. So there's really nothing that you have to do to switch over to DCC other than to just disconnect the DC and connect up the DCC. And actually, I've had guys that during their switchover, they maybe had locomotives each way. So you put in a double pole, double throw toggle switch, so you have a selector switch, so you can have your layout set for either DC or DCC depending on what you want to run. I've even had guys with a double track main line where they have one track on DC and the other one on DCC until they get switched over. I mean, that's the easy part. The locomotives are a little more work, especially in N-scale, if you're going to put decoders into them. So if you like real small work, you can do it yourself, or you can just buy new locomotives that already have decoders in them, and then maybe if you have old DC locomotives you don't want to convert, then maybe those would be something you could eBay or bring to a flea market or something.
Yeah. All right, I just want to remind everyone again to keep asking the questions down below so we can answer them live, and then also sign up for the newsletter and the banner that's there so you can be notified when we're doing our next Track Talk Live, get tips and tricks, and just be up to date on what we're doing at Model Railroad Academy. All right, so our next question is from Eric in South St. Paul, Minnesota.
Okay.
Specific area. That's where we are. We're in Minnesota. He's asking, can I run O on a 27 track? I was given a lot of cars and a house, some Army items, as I'm a Vietnam vet, and I've had trains since the 50s. Oh, that was just some added stuff. But can he run O on a 27 track?
Well, generally, the old gauge equipment was bigger and heavier and required a bigger radius curve. I mean, that would be the kind of the real crux of it. So, but all you can do is try it. I mean, the cars would run either way, but the locomotive may or may not take the 027 curves. The 027 is all just lightweight stuff, kind of just more temporary track, like you'd use for a Christmas display or something. But generally, the idea was that people would buy the 027 and then they'd eventually convert to the big O as they bought more equipment and larger equipment and heavier equipment and all that. So I would just say give it a try, and then get back to us if you're having a problem. Let us know just what equipment you have, and then maybe we can be of a little more help.
Give some more specific answers then. Okay, our next question is from Leslie in the USA, working in HO. Who is a beginner and asks, what is the best starter set for a true beginner?
Well, he didn't say what scale.
No.
I mean.
Oh no, actually HO.
Oh, okay.
That is in there.
I mean, what I would do actually, most of the starter sets are made for people who have no experience in the hobby and they just want to set something up. What I would probably the best thing to do would be to go to find a local hobby dealer.
Yeah.
And have them show you the differences in the quality of the various manufacturers. I mean, you want to get something that's good quality that's going to last. If you buy a cheap train set, they have these cheap train sets at like these discount home stores and everything. That's probably something to stay away from. I would get a good quality set, and I mean, I have stuff that I've had for 50 years, that's still
lasts.
good. Yeah. So whatever you do, buy good quality stuff, and you'll be much happier in the long run.
Speaking of beginner, I noticed we have a lot of people who list that they're beginners on here, and I thought maybe it would be interesting if you have maybe a top 5, like somebody who's just starting to get into model railroading. What would you like to tell them as a beginner? Some tips for them or advice in your experience?
Well, certainly talk to people who have been in the hobby and get their viewpoint. Now, we're happy to help you here, but their Model Railroad Academy has a lot of videos and things that are helpful. And then pretty much any city of any size has a model railroad group. And so I would get a hold of your local model railroad group and talk to those folks and see what they're doing and get advice. There's plenty of people out there that are willing to help.
Yeah.
They love the hobby and they want everybody to enjoy it, so they're more than happy to help you out. If you have any specific questions, we're happy to help you here.
Yep. Just curious if you had anything that you would tell a beginner right out of the gate.
Yeah, well, like you can get hooked. You can get hooked for life.
Yeah, so be prepared for that. All right, our next question is from Dave in Gray Cloud Island. Not sure where that is, but Gray Cloud Island.
Oh, Dave, I know Dave.
Dave?
I know Dave, Gray Cloud Island, that's south of St. Paul.
Is it? Working in S scale. Asking what material makes the best backdrop base and why. I've heard of sheetrock, lightweight flexible sheetrock, roll linoleum, roll sheet metal, hardboard, and coated hardboard. And perhaps there are others. So out of those, what would you feel is?
Well, all of the above. I mean, it kind of depends on what you're doing. I worked with a guy who used stretched canvas.
Oh.
He actually bought canvas by the roll and then stretched it. When you use sheet material, the trick is the joints.
Oh.
And how you're going to seal up the joints and make sure that they don't crack or show later. And so the coolest stuff I've seen is that actually like an artist canvas.
Yeah.
Rolled and stretched. I have masonite behind my layout that I painted and put up, and I sealed up the joints the best I could.
Yep.
And I know people who have used sheetrock for sure. I know people who have used actually tin sheet.
Tin sheet.
And so when you do a corner on your layout, you don't want a square corner that's going to show. You want a curved corner. So sometimes people will mix the media. They'll use masonite for the flat sections, and then maybe use tin or scored sheetrock for the corners. You can take sheetrock and score the back of it, so it'll bend. So I'd say all of the above. Whatever works. That's another one of those things. It's hard to say. Everybody has their own idea about what works. But
and then don't be afraid to mix and match with it. You don't have to stick with just one.
Yeah.
Oliver. All right, we have another question live from John in Nebo, North Carolina. I have a Lionel Fast Track 6-foot by 8-foot layout, and the locomotive slowed down in a few spots. I have a Lionel voltage car, which I have slowly run around the track, and the voltage is even throughout the layout. What else can I do to check to solve my problem?
Well, you know what can happen though. A voltage car is great, but your voltage can change under load.
Oh.
So if just because you're getting good voltage with no load, basically, a voltmeter is what the car is, doesn't mean that you're getting the same voltage when you're actually running a train. And so I would suggest what we talked about earlier with the other fellow that had a slow spot in his layout is try some feeders. Get some clip leads, maybe 6 feet long with alligator clips, clip it onto a good part of the track, and then try touching it over to the area where it's slowing down and see if you can determine, if you just clip onto one rail at a time, making sure you have the polarity right, of course, clip onto one rail at a time and see if it improves, and that will tell you which rail of the two is not getting good conduction.
It's slowing it down. All right, our next question is from Tommy in Westminster, Colorado, who works in HO, O, and G. For HO scale, please explain the differences between electro frogs and insulated frog turnouts. I'm running a 60-year-old brass engine. Which kind of turnouts should I be using, electro or insulated frogs?
Well, personally, I like electro, the powered frogs. The insulated frog is just that. When you throw the switch, the frog needs to change polarity because just the way the trackage works. So. If you have an insulated frog, you don't have to do anything, basically, but you have that dead spot there. Yep. And especially older locomotives, modern locomotives tend to have pretty much all the wheels as pickup wheels, but older locomotives didn't always have all the wheels as electrical pickup wheels, and so, you know, there could potentially be a problem. You could hit that little dead spot and your locomotive could slow down or stop. And so, because I'm kind of old school, I like to use the powered frog. And that way there's no dead spot anywhere. But then, of course, you have to change the polarity of that frog, and that's where we go back to that other comment there where you use whatever you're using to throw the switch, be it a ground throw, like a Caboose Industries throw, or a Circuitron Tortoise, or another powered switch motor or machine. You have contacts on there that will change the polarity of that switch frog. Does that make sense?
I think so. I hope it made sense to you.
So yeah, I mean, I like the powered frog, but it's more work.
Yeah, but maybe it works a little better then. Put more work into it. All right, we have another question live from Dallas. Is it possible to run a DC track and DCC on the same track using catenary overhead? Well, the problem you'd run into is that the catenary would be just one side of the feed, and you'd have to have the power, basically a power in the ground, say call it, for each system. So that would, in theory, be true if you could totally separate the two systems, but you'd need two rails or two wires to make that work. It wouldn't work with just a common rail. Just a single one. All right, question from Robert in Monrubin, Queensland, working in N-scale. What's the best startup system for a small layout using a wireless controller?
Well, did you say what scale he's in?
N-scale.
In N-scale. You know, it goes back, because I started with NCE, I like NCE and I'm familiar with it, but it doesn't mean the other brands aren't good. Pretty much all of the DCC systems have a wireless control. And I use wireless with my NCE, and I like it. I think they're all pretty much the same. I mean, as far as the reception and all that, I think they're all pretty much the same. Just whatever particular one you settle on, or what your friends use. I mean, that's nice too. If you have friends that are using a particular system, then you can share the knowledge.
Get the information from them. Our next question is from Robert in Merrimack, New Hampshire, working in HO and N-scale. They are looking to make an N-scale baseball field, but can't find any dimensions. How would you suggest going about finding your dimensions, or maybe doing some math?
You know, we did a model when my son was in grade school. We did a model, and you can look that up if you go to Google. You can find the dimensions of what the standard. What is it? 90 feet between bases, I think.
I think so.
But then you can get all the dimensions that you need out of the internet.
Yep.
Just Google baseball field, and you'll probably get more information than you possibly need. So.
All right, another live question from Bob in Canada. Doug, please talk to us about vertical curves when building grades.
Vertical curves, yes. Well, that's a kind of that's an interesting thing. We actually have talked about that quite a bit.
It must be a popular subject.
Well, it's a transition, and real railroads use it too. I mean, basically, if you're going from say dead level to a grade, you don't want to go like this. You know, I mean, you have to transition into that grade, and so that's the kind of, I think, the more model railroad term, not real railroads, but I don't know what the real railroad engineering term would be for that. I guess just a transition, but you want to transition to the grade. You don't want to have that kink, and so you're not going from dead level to 2% in a kink. And the way I like to do it, in fact, I do it on transition curves, horizontal curves too, is that I use a stiff ruler. And if you bend it, or you can even do that with the right kind of a piece of wood, but you can actually bend it, then that wood will just take just a really nice transition shape, and use that for a guide as you do that vertical curve.
Nice guide there. Another question live from Harold in Phoenix, Arizona. What is the best method for stripping paint from a post-war Lionel F3 engine?
Well, you know, there's a lot of, I'm not sure what kind of paint they would have used back then, but, you know, the paints have changed a lot, you know, they're less toxic and all that. And we've talked about this, I think, maybe a couple of Track Talk Lives back, but Scale Coat Paints makes a thing called wash away. It's a solution that they say will work on just about anything.
On anything,
And it's not toxic. You know, in the old days, people would use, say, lacquer thinner. I don't know, people would use brake fluid, all kinds of. You never know what the composition of the paint is, and so you'd have to experiment to get the right stuff. So I would try that Scale Coat wash away first, and just do a little experiment with it and see if it actually takes the paint off.
Starts taking it off. All right, our next question is from David in Pennsylvania, working in O scale. I want to unpack, we actually talked about these a little bit beforehand. I want to unpack my dad's old O27 and would like to expand and create a semi-permanent setup. Are all O-gauge tracks interchangeable? And if not, can I use any radius O-tubular track with my O27?
Well, the difference is in the rail size between what they call the big O, the full-size O, and then the O27. The O27 is the lightweight version. I mean, in theory, you could match them up, and the rail size is different. I mean, the rail gauge is the same, but the rail size is different. So if you're going to try to butt the two together, you'd have to kind of come up with a way of adapting the rail so that it matches on the top edges. Most people, I think, stay with what they have, but if you're going to go to, like we talked earlier, if you're going to go to bigger equipment, heavier equipment, that kind of thing, bigger locomotives, you probably want to go to the big O anyway. Just use the O. It's much more durable and made for those heavy O-gauge locomotives.
Yep, made to last. All right, our next question is from David in California, working in HO. What is the best material to model large mountains with?
Well, if you're talking about just the base structure, I mean, actually a big mountain, back in the old days we would use, say, chicken wire and screen, for a big mountain, you know, say you're doing 8 feet a mountain or something. Chicken wire and screen, and then use heavy-duty paper toweling like shop towels, and soak those in hydrocal. And the hydrocal, being wet, is pretty heavy when you first put it on, but then it dries lightweight and very strong. And for a big mountain, especially if you want to be able to lean on it or maybe even walk on it, then you have to use multiple coats of hydrocal. But you can actually get a shell. Actually, hydrocal is called hard shell scenery just for that fact. So it's heavy when it's wet, so you maybe use extra props or whatever you need, sticks to hold it up until it's dry, then you can take the sticks away. And that's kind of the traditional way that we did big mountains in the old days. Now they have, you know, people are using the gauze like you have for doing a plaster cast. If you break your leg or something, you can use the gauze, which actually is a lot easier than using hydrocal because the gauze already has the plaster impregnated in it.
Sticks right on.
And it has that kind of a cross mesh sort of a fabric in there, so it's very strong. So that's what I'd recommend to get started with. Of course, then that's just the shape, the overall shape, and then you're going to use, there's all kinds of techniques you can use for the mountain surface. I mean, there's rock casting and all that kind of stuff that goes on the top, but you want to get a good structure on the underside before you do the detail work.
Something sturdy.
Yeah.
All right, our next question live is from Jay in Minneapolis. Do you have any tips for building tall skyscrapers, perhaps like structurally, making sure they don't fall over, making them sturdy?
Yeah, we wouldn't want them to fall over. Well, what's happening now is that, if you're doing any kind of a big building that has a lot of windows, I mean, say you're doing a building that has 100 windows or something, that would be like crazy to try to build that thing all by yourself. And so people are using laser cutters now to where you can lay it out on the computer, and especially if you're doing a building that has a lot of 100 windows that are the same.
Yeah.
You can just lay it on the computer and just have it cut this thing all out, and it's just
handy.
Yeah, it's really great. And then as far as the structure goes, in any building, depending on what you're doing, you want to have a structure. So depending on how big the building is, people use you can use like rigid wood, basswood or spruce or something, or in a bigger building people are using metal structure like say brass angles and I-beams and all that, and then you can actually solder them together.
Oh.
So I mean very strong building.
Yeah. Very structurally sound.
Yeah, and then it shouldn't fall down.
We hope not. But
unless your cat jumps up on your lap.
Yeah, then you got a problem. Worst case scenario. Okay, our next question is from Clay in Hampstead, Maryland, working in O scale. What is the best method for stripping paint from, we just had this question, stripping the paint. Let's see. This one is about laser cutting from James in Rochester, New York, working in HO scale. I bought my first laser cut wood building kit. How do you paint it? And what issue of MR of Model Railroad Academy had an article on how to assemble this type of kit? Do we have an article on painting laser cutting wood kits?
Well, I'm sure there's something there. I would have to look it up. I couldn't tell you. My brain isn't that good. But generally speaking, depending on what you're doing with the building, if it's a laser cut wood kit, are you going to leave it? Is it supposed to look like a wooden building, or is it supposed to look like a brick building, or whatever it is? Well, yeah. I mean, if it's a wood building, generally you can use stain. If you want it to look like like an old Wild West building, kind of a weathered old wood building, or if you want it to look like a well-kept building, then you seal the wood and then paint it.
Yeah.
I mean, the neat thing about laser cut kits is that they're so well cut. I mean, in the old days, the old techniques were, that's kind of close.
Eyeball it.
But now everything, if it doesn't fit right, you're doing something wrong. I mean, it just the kits are so good. So that's the main thing. And then you just stain them or paint them to whatever you need. But if you're going to paint, I would seal the wood first.
Seal it first. All right, I just want to remind everybody quick again to keep asking your questions live in the comments below so that we can answer them before Track Talk Live wraps up. And also sign up for our newsletter to be notified of our next Track Talk Live and get tips and tricks in your inbox. You can also follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, where we're always posting model railroad related stuff if you're interested in that. So make sure you're following us, asking questions, and signing up. All right, our next question is from Charles in Springfield, Montana, working in HO scale. I'm having some trouble making a waterfall on a backdrop. I'm trying different things, but they don't produce the results I want. Just painting is okay. However, I'm trying caulk on wax paper, and I can't get that to transfer to the painted waterfall. Do you have any tips?
Yeah, I know that feeling. I know there's different ways of doing it. People use caulk with tinsel. You can use tinsel as the base because it gives you that kind of silvery, reflective look of the water.
It's a good season to get tinsel. So.
Yeah, and buy your tinsel now, or maybe right after Christmas.
Yeah, get it on sale.
But and build it up that way, and then attach it to the wall. If you use a flexible like silicone caulk or latex caulk that where you can actually pre-build the waterfall on your workbench, and then I think that's what he's talking about there, and then attach it on there. And there's also a paint that I like to use. It's like a glow white. What do they call it? Phosphorescent white or artist paint. That actually I use that on clouds too, and it works really good. It kind of gives the clouds a glistening look. But I mean, I think he's on the right path there.
Yep.
Just keep experimenting with what you're doing, and I like the tinsel because it actually gives it some. If you do the tinsel vertically, it gives you a structure too. Kind of holds it all
up
together.
a little bit better.
Yeah.
Tinsel in the waterfall. All right, our next question is from Mike, live in Pennsylvania, working in HO scale. How do you recommend building a decreasing radius helix to simulate a mountain with a 360-degree visual axis? I need to have a vertical increase of 24 inches.
Ooh, well, that's going to take a little engineering, and that's all possible. I mean, actually, people, we were talking about transition curves. People can use a way of coming up with variable radius on those things too by actually. It takes a little practice, but you can actually take, like, say, something tubular with your line and your pencil on the end that you're doing your radius, and then, of course, as you work around the tube, then the radius is going to get smaller. So you have your tube in the center. That's your center point, and then you work around. And so you'd have to experiment to get the right diameter tube and all that kind of stuff. But that's kind of the simple way of doing it without getting into all kinds of fancy engineering. I suppose there's a way you can do it on your computer too, if you could, you
could figure that out.
Yeah, if you can do it. But the simple way is just have a tube.
Have a tube. All right, our next question is live from Bruce. I have a wide variety of HO scale locomotives, some purchased new and others used. Is there a simple way to determine if they are DC only, DCC ready, or DCC equipped without taking the locomotives apart and not having a DCC system at my disposal?
Well, yeah, I mean, generally they should be, if you have the boxes, it should be identified on the box what they are.
Yeah.
If they're not identified on the box, I mean, and he doesn't have DCC, so he could try just putting a locomotive on the track and see what happens. I mean, if it runs, then it's a DC. If it doesn't run, earlier we talked too, a DCC ready locomotive would have that dummy plug in it to allow it to run in DC. So if it runs on DC, it could be a straight DC, or it could be a DCC ready locomotive. That'd tell you that much. And if it didn't run at all, either it's just dead or it's DCC. Maybe if you have a club in your area or something like that that has DCC, you could take your equipment over there and try that and see. That'd probably be the simple way of doing it. Otherwise, you have to take the shell off. And depending on the type of locomotive, it might be easy, it might be hard, but you have to take the shell off and look inside if there's no other way to find out.
All right. Our next question is from Dani in Rhode Island, working in HO. I've had two layouts in the 70s, lots of old brass track. Now I'm retired and I want to get back into modeling, so can I mix brass and steel track?
I wouldn't.
No.
No, that's old technology. If you really has steel, but people use nickel silver now, and nickel silver doesn't tarnish like brass, and it looks more natural, like a real railroad rail. But that brass track, brass oxidizes so easy, and you're always cleaning your brass track. It was just a big pain, and steel would rust. Well, same thing. So. It wouldn't for the track isn't that expensive. I mean, I would just start over.
Go ahead and change it up.
The other thing is there's much better quality switches now than there used to be.
Time for an upgrade. All right. Our next question is from Joe in Brandon, Florida, working in N scale. I'm looking for various ways to paint my track to make it look more realistic. I've had bad experience years ago when I tried this, and the electrical conductivity was horrible afterwards. What is your best practice for achieving this, especially in N or with lighter engines?
Well, I mean, I pre-weather my track before I install it, and I use just a spray can, just lightly. I don't try to completely cover it up. I just give it a light coat, which actually acts kind of like a primer. It's a flat finish, a primer that I put on the track that'll hold the paint, the final paint. And then after I lay the track, I can go back with my airbrush and actually weather
Add
the
the
track how I want, because actually, you know, in real track, it's not only the rail that's weathered, the ties are weathered, the ballast is weathered, it all gets dirty. But then you come back with your track cleaning block,
Yep.
your sanding block, and just sand off the top.
There you go.
And then you don't have to worry about it. Just don't even worry about getting paint on the top of your rail. Just clean it off. All you need for contact is the top of the rail.
Yeah.
So the sides can be dirty, and it actually does make the rail look more realistic, because
Yeah.
you look at a real railroad track and it's not silver on the side. You know,
Yeah.
it's
warm.
dirty. So it's silver on the top from the wear of the real equipment. So that's what I'd say. I just get some kind of a primer on it and come back with your airbrush and tweak it up with a little bit of grime or rust or whatever you want to use.
Yep.
Sometimes the sidings are more rusty than the main line, that type of thing. And then just clean off the top and you should be fine.
Have better conductivity then. All right, our next question is from Larry in Washington, working in HO scale. I'm in the process of designing a shelf layout. What are your tips and or good books for reference for designing and DCC wiring on a shelf layout?
Well, there's a lot of stuff available on shelf layouts. I mean, there's so many. There's publications on shelf layouts. There's things you can look up on the internet. And I love shelf layouts. I have a shelf layout.
Yeah.
And first of all, it depends on just what your theme is going to be. Like I'm doing an industrial area.
Yep.
But depending on your theme, just what you want to accomplish, you want to get something that works well. Mine is a point-to-point. It's not a continuous run. So that if you're not interested in a continuous run, then maybe you're interested in operation. Mine is designed for operation with a waybill system, and cars are moved in a realistic fashion.
Yeah.
And if he wants to send us more information about or send me more information about what he's interested in, I'd be happy to help, because I love shelf layouts. Sure. As far as DCC goes, it's no big deal. You just put in feeders like you would normally, and if you have spurs and switches and things, I mean, it doesn't hurt when you're building the layout to put in plenty of feeders, because that way you don't have to come back and add them later if a rail joint goes bad.
Yeah.
So just put in plenty of feeders, and for DCC, they're basically all interconnected anyway. They connect down to the bus, and so the DCC is really not a big deal.
All right, good answer. Our next question is from Tony in New Zealand. Working in HO scale. A lot of HO today. Is it possible to connect two Markland crane magnets together in order to make a container grab for the Markland swivel crane? Do I need to increase the supply voltage to the magnets?
Well, that is a good question. All you can do is experiment. I don't know. I mean, you have to get the polarity correct in the magnets, right? Yep. And then you're going to have some kind of generally the containers are just plastics. You'd have to have some kind of a metal strip or something inside that the magnets would grab onto. So, I mean, I've never done it. I don't know, but it seems to me if you just try them out, a couple of magnets and a metal bar inside the container, and click, and
see how it goes.
Should be easy, right? Let us know. That's a good question.
Send your feedback.
Maybe we'll go to New Zealand and check it out.
Yeah, I'd love to go to New Zealand, especially now. It's cold in Minnesota. Get the warm weather. Although I do like the snow. All right, our next question is from, Bob in Hendersonville, North Carolina, working in O-scale and high rail, it says. I'm trying to run both TMCC and MTH Proto 2 through an MTH TIU. Lots of acronyms happening. The TMCC runs pretty well, but the MTH often doesn't. I've previously had bus wiring, but replaced that with star wiring, but it still doesn't work very well. Any suggestions? Also, how to wire switchers DZ1000 to an MTH AIU.
I don't know all those acronyms either, to be honest with you, but generally MTH works real well. I mean, it's a quality stuff, and it sounds to me like there might be more of a problem in the wiring than anything else. If you want to send in if you want to send in more specific diagrams, I'd certainly be happy to research it and try to help you out. But it could be just a wiring issue. I mean, if you're having a problem, I mean, you can always just go by process of elimination and start disconnecting some feeders, and maybe get yourself down to one set of feeders on one section of the layout, and just try it and see if that works, and then expand. And then expand
from there. Okay. Our next question is from Lester in Columbus, Georgia, asking, how do you make ripples in water?
Well, you know, I like using gloss gel, which you can buy at an art supply store. And that's like gloss medium. Gloss medium is sort of a, like white glue, kind of looks like white glue, but it dries clear. Well, gloss gel is kind of the same thing, and so it's kind of like putting frosting on a cake.
Yeah.
You know, you can put your own ripples in there however you want. You know, and don't try to do them all in one coat, because unless you're maybe a professional cake decorator,
and then maybe you can
do it. But otherwise, the thing to do is just don't try to do it all at once. You can actually do a little bit at a time and let it dry and look it over, and then you can add some of that effervescent white paint I was talking about, and add that if you want to actually make little white caps in the ripples. You can actually paint those in.
If you have some extreme weather happening.
Yeah, you know, you could have a tsunami wave or something hit into your layout. But and then because the gloss gel dries clear, you can actually do a clear coat over the white caps, and then kind of have so the white cap is sort of buried in the gloss. You know what I mean? So that's what I'd recommend, and I like it because it takes longer, but you can work your way up to it. You don't have to try to accomplish it all in one shot. You can just play with it and get the ripples the way you want it.
Get it just perfect. All right, our next question is from Hank in Georgia, who first says, hi, Doug. So, hi, Georgia. Hi, Hank. Any recommendations for making more realistic brick buildings, specifically making the individual bricks look real?
Well, there are outfits now that are actually selling laser cut brick sheets that you can use for buildings. Monster Model Works out in California is great. That's what I use for S-scale. And they have brick and stone and all that. And then the mortar lines, of course, are just cut right in with the laser cutter, you know. And they really look great. I mean, to me, I wouldn't want to try to do it myself. I mean, I got plenty of other stuff to do in my layout besides make a brick wall, you know what I mean? So I would rather buy quality material, and in the case of Monster Model Works, he makes them at all different scales. I mean, I can buy S-scale brick, and he makes sidewalk. You can buy sidewalk with the cracks in it.
You don't even have to crack it yourself. It comes pre-cracked.
Or pavement, like if you had a paved, like a concrete paved street with cracks. Cool stuff with cracks.
They have some neat stuff going on.
Why do it yourself when you can buy it? It just, you know. I got a lot of, like I say, a lot of other things I can be doing besides.
There's so much to work on, so you got to pick and choose what's your favorite, huh?
It's all a priority thing.
All right, our next question is from Walt in Texas, working in HO. Do you recommend soldering every rail joint, and if not, how much spacing between each one you solder?
Well, to be honest, I don't like to solder rail joints. Because you need a little expansion and contraction. And depending on your room, you know, we were saying earlier, if you have it, you know, the temperature controlled year round and the humidity controlled year round and all that kind of thing, you're probably not going to have a lot of trouble. And most guys, where they have trouble is when they first build their layout, maybe say they're using plywood, and you know, you should really bring it in and let it acclimate to your room before you work with it. But you know, the plywood could move around, you know, all this kind of thing that it would affect your layout. So I just don't solder. I put plenty of feeders in, and then if you put plenty of feeders in, there's no need to solder.
We've heard plenty of feeders several times today, so I guess that's the moral of the story. Plenty of feeders.
Especially in the back, because you know that's an old story about model railroading. Never goes bad in the front.
It always goes bad in the back.
Always goes bad in the back where you can't reach it.
The hardest place to get it, of course. All right, our next question is from Bill in the United States, working in HO. I'm making my own buildings from scratch, and I need to know how and what to light them. Also, how to make an incline, like to go up into a mountain on the buildings, I think he's saying. Incline on the buildings.
Well, maybe he's talking about a grade in the track, which goes back to that vertical curve idea we were
two separate questions.
Going to. Well, in S-scale, as far as doing buildings, I mean, there's so little available in S-scale. It's pretty much a scratch builder scale, and so I start out with rigid cardboard. And I'm using these priority mail post office boxes. So if you get something in the mail, priority mail, it's thin, rigid cardboard. It's really nice. And you can shape out a building out of the cardboard, and you can draw windows or doors or whatever you want onto it, and cut the roof line however you want it. And if you don't like it, recycle.
There you go.
Start over. You know, but in my case, once I get the building as I like it, then I take the sheeting, like we were talking about. You could use brick sheeting or tin siding, whatever you're doing. You can actually sheet right over that cardboard. And I bought an assortment of doors and windows
Yeah.
Just kind of different sizes and stuff so I can look at my building and say, oh, I want to put this size window here, this size window there, so on. And I think it's really a neat way of doing it.
Yeah.
Now, as far as the grade goes, you know, you can buy a digital level now that actually will read out the grade. In the old days, you had to go through all this mathematics to try to figure it out. But nowadays, all you do is put a digital level on there, and you can see what your grade is.
Much quicker.
And you know, model railroads pretty much work the same as real railroads as far as the grade goes. I mean, 2% is pretty steep on a model railroad and a real railroad, unless you're doing a mining railroad or a logging railroad or something. But a mainline railroad, 2% is pretty steep. So. And you can actually, when you do your transition grade, you can do the same thing. You can start out with you know, actually transition it up, say from 0% level up to 2% by transitioning. And I actually have an app for my iPhone that I can use. I can actually set it right on the track, and it'll read out the percent of grade.
Well, that's handy. Put it all in one there.
Cool stuff. Saves all that mathematics. Yeah.
Then you have more time to work on the things you want.
Exactly.
All right, we're coming to our last question here, running out of time. This last question is from Kevin, live in North Dakota. He says his engines run smoothly in one direction, but when they change direction, they derail at the same part of the layout. Any ideas on what could be causing this?
Well, it doesn't sound like a mechanism problem. It sounds like is he turned the locomotive around on the track to see if it runs okay? Is it just because the locomotive is going one direction or going one direction on the track? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So sometimes you could have a funny little thing like in the trucks. There might be something in the trucks that'll hit a little underbody detail just enough to clip it and knock it off the track. And so, yeah, I would try reversing the engine on the track and trying different things. Try a different locomotive. Does a different locomotive work okay? And then if it's just one particular locomotive, I mean, you got to get down there. I mean, I get down there with a flashlight and I just watch it and see exactly where it comes off the track and try to pinpoint it. There could be a little maybe a slightly narrow gauge section in the track. The gauge might be pinched a little bit, and maybe other locomotives work fine, but this particular locomotive might be just fussy. So yeah, you just have to experiment and
see what it is. Could be the littlest thing, you never know.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us at Track Talk Live today. Thank you, Doug, for answering all of the questions. If you didn't get your question answered, you can send it in to us and hopefully we can get back to you. But like I said before, sign up for the newsletter down below to be notified of the next Track Talk Live. And as we say here, run trains, run trains. So, do you have any other closing remarks for us, Doug?
Thank you, Miss Chuchu. It was wonderful.
So we'll see you next time at Track Talk Live.